Okay, starting with number 1, principal values, arc sine of -1. We know sine is going to be negative in the fourth quadrant. Principal values, sine and tangent has special locations. So normally we would say sine is -1 at 3π/2. But in this case, with principal values, we have to make the adjustment and say -π/2. Inverse cosine of -√2/2. Principal values, uppercase C. So cosine is equal to -√2/2. With cosine, negative is in the second quadrant. So, and we know it's in the π/4 family. So 3π/4. Inverse tangent of -1/√3. Based off of our unit circle value. Hey. It's going to be in the family, π/6 family. So y/x, 1/√3. But with uppercase T, principal values, we're talking about the fourth quadrant. So we want something that is in that π/6, sorry, that π/6 family. So -π/6. Okay, inverse cosine of √3/2. Principal values, however, it's positive, so that's easy. That means it's always going to be in the third quadrant. Think about our unit circle values here. Cosine is √3/2 at π/6. Morning. Okay. Inverse tangent of -√3. So we take care of the inside portion first. -√3 is same thing as -√3/1. Uppercase T, we know that we're dealing with the fourth quadrant with uppercase T. And inverse tangent is -√3 y/x. So it's going to be in that π/3 family here. Negative y/x, -√3/1. However, we can't say 5π/3. We have to say -π/3. So we made that substitution. We found the angle, the radian measure that's associated with that inside portion. And now we can solve the larger problem here. Sine of -π/3. In other words, sine of 5π/3. Fourth quadrant. Sine is going to be -√3/2. Okay, number 6, arc cosine of sine of 5π/3. We'll do the inside portion first. Sine of 5π/3. We know it's -√3/2. Arc cosine. So principal value. Okay. Uppercase A. Where is cosine of theta? or what theta will allow cosine to be negative root 3 over 2. We know that principal values with cosine is first and second quadrant. Negative will be second quadrant. So cosine negative root 3 over 2, that pi over 6 family. So 5 pi over 6. Okay, questions so far? Okay. All right, number 7, inverse tangent. So tangent of 3 pi over 4. So inside portion first, tangent of 3 pi over 4. We know tangent is going to be negative in the second quadrant. So y over x, root 2 over negative root 2 is just negative 1. So principal values, uppercase S, where it was theta will allow sine to be negative 1. That's going to be 3 pi over 2, but principal values, we have to make an adjustment here, fourth quadrant, negative pi over 2. Okay, principal values, cosine theta equals root 3 over 2. But it's it's positive ratio, so that's easy, first quadrant. So it's going to be in that pi over 6 family. So now cotangent of pi over 6. Cotangent is x over y. So x over y is root 3 over 1, which is just root 3. Okay. Now we're dealing with a ratio that is not on the unit circle. However, we can use triangles to help us fill out the rest of the information. So our cosine of negative 40 over 41. So values, where is cosine going to be negative? Cosine is going to be negative in the second quadrant. So we have to build our triangle in the second quadrant. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So negative 40 over 41. Hypotenuse is always positive. Adjacent, in this case, is negative. Okay, Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, use your calculator, subtract 41 squared minus 40 squared. We get 81. Take the square root of 81, we get 9. Okay, so now we turn around and do the larger problem here. Tangent of theta. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So negative 9 over 40.
Wait, Mr. Yang, how do you
Yeah.
know that it's in the second quadrant, like the triangle?
Right, because but this is principal values, right? Uppercase C, uppercase A. So with inverse cosine, positive cosine will be first quadrant, negative cosine will have to be in the second quadrant.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, good so far? All right, so now with variables, the nice thing about variables is you can just build your triangles in the first quadrant always. Okay, so tangent is opposite over adjacent. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Cosine of theta is just adjacent over hypotenuse. Inverse sine of 3 over x. Okay, Pythagorean theorem helps you find that third missing side. Cotangent of theta is x over y. Inverse cosine of 3x. Three x over 1. Adjacent over hypotenuse. Right, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so instead of opposite over hypotenuse, is hypotenuse over opposite. Okay, any question with the first page? Okay, back page, use the calculator to find values of theta. Want to make sure that we're in degree mode here. And there's degree. Okay, arc sine of negative 0.1821. And find the theta that will allow sine to be okay. You should get 54 degrees in your calculator. Negative 54. But let's see here. Sine is going to be negative in the first, or well, we're talking about not principal values here. So we're looking for two quadrants where sine is going to be negative. Sine is going to be negative in the third and fourth. So we can just cover up that negative there and just understand that 54 is really that reference angle that can help us find our third and fourth quadrant measure. So to get to that fourth quadrant value, we're going to subtract from 360. To get to that third quadrant value, we're going to involve 180. Okay, so 360 minus 54. $180 plus 54. Okay. Inverse cosine of negative 0.2211. I got 102.77 degrees, which I can round up to 103 degrees. Now, this is not a reference angle like before, but let's do some, let's understand which quadrant we're supposed to be in. So cosine is negative in the second and third quadrant. So that 103 is perfect. It's already in the second quadrant. So we know that's one of our answers. But we want to find something related in the third quadrant. And the way we're going to get there is we're going to get to our reference angle first. And if we can find our reference angle, then we know how far away to add to 180 to get to that third quadrant measure. Okay, so 180 minus 103 gives us 77. So if I'm 77 degrees away on the second quadrant, I'm going to be 77 degrees away in the third quadrant from 180. 180 plus 77. Okay, tangent theta is 0.5249. Theta is 28 degrees. We want tangent to be positive. So that's going to be in the first and third. Okay, good so far with degrees. Yeah.
These just like not matter at all.
I'm sorry?
Does arc or like, let's say like arc sine, what would you?
Yeah, arc sine versus inverse cosine, they all mean the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just going to hit that cosine or that sine button twice.
Okay.
Yeah, inverse. Yeah, same notations. Okay, the difference here, 16 through 18, is that we have to be in radian mode. We have to make a slight adjustment, understanding that instead of looking for 0, 90, 180, 270, we got now think in terms of pi and 2 pi, and our reference angle is now going to be a decimal less than 1.57. Okay. Because 1.57 is a decimal approximation of pi over 2, and pi over 2 is the radian measure of radian version of 90 degrees. Okay, arc sine of 0.9723. So 1.335, that's actually in the first quadrant. So we know that is a reference angle for us. Sine is going to be positive in the first and the second quadrant. So we can build out using our reference angle. So 1.335 is already our first quadrant measure. But to get to that second quadrant measure, subtract from what? Oh, good. Not 180 anymore, but it is related. It'll be pi minus 1.335. Theta is 2.496. Figure out where is cosine going to be negative. Cosine is going to be negative in the second and third quadrant. Now 2.496 It's actually going to already be in the second quadrant, right? It's greater than 1.57, but less than 3.14. So we know that's one of our answers. But we want to find a corresponding measure in the third quadrant. So we're gonna have to figure out the reference angle first, subtract from pi, get that reference measure, and then we can do the same thing that we did above with 14, just in terms of radians now. So pi minus 2.496, get 0.646. Add that to pi. Okay, tangent theta equals negative 0.4451. So tangent is negative in the second and the fourth quadrant. Ignore that negative there. Just think about that 0.419. That 0.419 is perfect for our reference angle. So we'll build out from there. Subtract from 2 pi to get to that fourth quadrant measure. Subtract from pi to get to that second quadrant measure. Okay, 19 and 20 build out triangles in the appropriate quadrant. Okay. Arc cosine of negative 2/7. So principal values here, cosine is going to be negative in the second quadrant here. Build out your triangle in the second quadrant. Okay, C. Pythagorean theorem. Tangent theta is root 45 over negative 2. Opposite over adjacent. Okay, our tangent of negative 4. Tangent is negative uppercase T, so we got to do principal values here. Make sure we pick the correct quadrant. Quadrant 4 is where tangent is negative. Okay. Any questions?
What's the difference between like a positive, not positive, like a capitalized and a Not capitalized. like-
Right, so when you have capitalized, you have to make sure you pick from one of these quadrants. But if it's not capitalized, that means you have more than one option. So like 13 through 18, we're always gonna get two answers because we're all dealing with these lowercase. Yeah, for uppercase, we gotta make sure we pick from principal values in the,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there a difference between negative and positive, which one you have to choose?
Yeah, there is. So we saw on the previous page, right, how, for instance, inverse tangent, tangent theta is negative uppercase T. We can't, we're choosing between first and fourth quadrant, but that negative ratio forces us to pick from the fourth quadrant.
Okay.
Yeah, but if it's in the fourth quadrant, you have to also understand that we can't use these normal fourth quadrant values. We got to make these negative adjustments.
Okay.
So for the principal values, like on sine, is quadrant 4 negative, like tan?
That's right. Yep. So sine is negative in the fourth quadrant, just like tangent. Tangent is negative in the fourth quadrant.
And
Cosine
then
is
positive in the first.
That's right. Yeah. So
Okay.
if you see positive ratio, it's all going to be consistent. Cosine, sine, and tangent, they're all going to be just in the first quadrant. It's only the negative ratios with principal values that you got to make the adjustments, either quadrant 2 or quadrant 4.
All right.
Okay. If you have any other questions. I have some more blank worksheets if you want to practice through.